Let's be honest right out of the gate. This was never just a broadcast debut. When Caitlin Clark stepped onto NBC's pregame set, the internet didn't just watch, it reacted. Headlines exploded, ratings surged, and suddenly a WNBA rookie was the center of an NBA Sunday night conversation. That doesn't happen by accident, and it definitely doesn't happen without ruffling a few feathers. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. Caitlin Clark isn't supposed to move numbers like this. Not as a guest, not as a WNBA player, and definitely not before she's even fully settled into her pro career.
All right, so obviously Caitlin Clark's broadcasting debut went well. The game itself drew big numbers. You can't directly attribute that to Caitlin Clark, obviously, but part of a big-time broadcast for NBC, and obviously there were a lot of people who were interested and tuned in for her. You saw the headlines afterwards. Payton Pritchard's name mentioned more.
Yet somehow, there she was, pulling attention, pulling viewers, and pulling praise from places that usually keep women's basketball at arm's length. And that's where the tension starts. Was this just a feel-good moment, or was this another reminder that Clark's gravity inside basketball, men's or women's, is already rewriting the rules? On her hoops, we don't just celebrate moments like this. We question what they mean, who benefits, and why certain names always seem to dominate the spotlight.
Than it probably ever has been before, and even some of her fevered teammates weighed in and gave her the thumbs up on what she did on the broadcast. But, you know, when I talk about Caitlin too, another thing you have to consider is her healthy sense of humor. She had this to say about the whole Payton Pritchard thing. I don't know if you technically it's to say, but she trolled a little bit, right, with those emojis on a highlight of Pritchard during the Celtics and Mavericks game, Payton Pritchard.
So buckle up, because this debut wasn't harmless hype, it was a signal. And the league, they felt it. Caitlin Clark didn't walk onto that NBC set as just another guest. She walked in carrying a year's worth of pressure, hype, resentment, admiration, and expectations that very few athletes, male or female, have ever had dumped on them all at once. Think about the timing. The WNBA season is still in limbo. Fans are restless. The Caitlin Clark conversation hasn't cooled off since college.
Giving her thoughts on how Caitlin did overall. This was Sophie on her podcast.
First of all, I think she did a really good job. She was a natural up there. She's a dweeb, so she knows the games, and that's no shock. I personally love Reggie, like kind of knowing Reggie a little bit. I don't think he meant any harm by it, but I do think, like, probably not the best comparison for like the generational player that Caitlin is. I don't think she took it personal. I don't think anyone would really take it personal, but I don't know if I would compare him to her.
If anything, it's gotten louder, sharper, and more divided. Every move she makes now gets dissected, and every opportunity she gets raises the same question: why her? That's why this NBC appearance mattered. Normally, pre-game shows don't make news. They don't dominate timelines. They don't spark debates about comparisons, respect, or who deserves what. But when Clark sat next to NBA legends, joked on air, and casually showed she could talk ball without missing a beat, it flipped the script. Then came that moment, the Payton Pritchard comparison. Not an insult, not a slight, just an off-the-cuff comment that instantly went viral because of who Caitlin Clark is in today's basketball ecosystem. Suddenly, everyone had an opinion. Players chimed in. Media rushed to explain. Fans argued over intent instead of substance. And through it all, Clark stayed calm, confident, unbothered. That's the context you need, because this wasn't about one broadcast. It was about how ready the basketball world is, or isn't, for Caitlin Clark to exist everywhere. First, let's talk performance, because that's the part people keep trying to downplay. By every measurable standard, Caitlin Clark delivered. She wasn't stiff. She wasn't overcoached. She didn't sound like someone reading cue cards. She sounded like what she is, a basketball junkie who actually understands spacing, shot creation, and flow, not just vibes and storylines. Her chemistry with the NBC crew? Natural. The horse segment with Jamal Crawford? Competitive, funny, and revealing. She lost the first round and immediately pushed for a best of 3. That wasn't a PR move. That was instinct. The same instinct that's followed her from Iowa to the pros. Then there's the reaction from people who know her best. Teammates didn't hedge. They didn't qualify their praise. No notes. That's rare in pro sports, especially when the spotlight is this bright. And let's not ignore the numbers. The broadcast pulled in massive viewership, and while you can't credit one person alone, pretending Clark wasn't a draw is disingenuous. Pre-game shows don't trend. Caitlin Clark does. Step by step, moment by moment, she did exactly what critics claim she can't do outside the lines. Command the room without forcing it. And that's what made some folks uncomfortable. Here's where the double standards start tripping over themselves. For years, we've been told that WNBA players need more exposure, more crossover appeal, more mainstream visibility. But the moment Caitlin Clark steps into an NBA broadcast space and does it well, the conversation shifts. Suddenly, it's about comparisons, about whether the praise is too much, about whether she's being pushed too fast, too hard, too often. That Payton Pritchard comment is the perfect example. It wasn't disrespectful. It wasn't malicious. Reggie Miller wasn't taking shots. He spent the entire broadcast praising her. But because the comparison didn't fit the generational legend box people expect, it turned into a debate instead of a compliment. And notice who had to clean it up. WNBA players came out to contextualize it. Media personalities rushed to explain intent. Everyone felt the need to reassure the audience that Caitlin Clark wasn't offended, as if she needed protecting from a moment she clearly laughed off. That's the contradiction. When male athletes cross over into media, we call it versatility. When Caitlin Clark does it, it becomes a referendum. The tension isn't about basketball knowledge or broadcast skill. It's about visibility, and who's allowed to have it without apology. Clark didn't ask for this storm. She walked into a studio, did her job, and left with the spotlight even brighter. And for some people, that's the real problem. What made this debut work wasn't just charisma, it was credibility. Caitlin Clark doesn't speak in cliches. She breaks things down the way players do, not the way media-trained guests are taught to. You could hear it in how she talked about shot selection, momentum swings, and confidence. She wasn't trying to sound smart. She is smart about the game, and that matters more than people realize. Then there's the personality layer. The emojis on the Payton Pritchard highlight? That wasn't arrogance, that was comfort. A player secure enough in her own skin to joke, troll lightly, and keep it moving. That balance, competitive but self-aware, is rare, especially under this level of scrutiny. And the competitiveness showed again behind the scenes. Losing the first horse game and immediately demanding a best of 3 isn't a throwaway anecdote, it's a tell. That's the same edge that's defined her entire career. Broadcasting didn't mute it, it revealed it. NBC noticed, executives noticed. They didn't talk about checking a box or trying something new. They talked about chemistry, enjoyment, and doing it again. That's industry language for "this worked." On her hoops, this is the kind of detail that matters, because it shows Caitlin Clark isn't experimenting with media. She's expanding her footprint in basketball spaces that usually don't open this easily. And that expansion has consequences. Caitlin Clark's NBC debut didn't just boost a broadcast. It exposed a reality the WNBA has been dancing around for years. There is massive demand for women's basketball personalities when they're placed in the right ecosystem. Not side segments, not charity slots. Real basketball conversations on real stages with real stakes. Clark didn't need the game to be about her. Her presence alone brought new eyes. And that should be both exciting and uncomfortable for the league. Exciting because it proves crossover appeal is real. Uncomfortable because it highlights how rarely that appeal is fully leveraged. This moment also reframes the marketability debate. Caitlin Clark isn't popular because she's promoted. She's promoted because people show up. Ratings don't lie. Engagement doesn't lie. And when a WNBA player becomes part of the most watched NBA game of the season conversation, that's not coincidence. That's gravity. But here's the catch. If the league can't capitalize on this momentum, if labor disputes, scheduling chaos, or internal resistance slow things down, moments like this start happening outside the WNBA instead of within it. That's the real impact. On her hoops, this isn't about crowning one player above the rest. It's about recognizing leverage when it exists. Caitlin Clark just showed what happens when opportunity meets preparation. Now the question is whether the league is ready to keep up. Caitlin Clark's NBC debut wasn't a novelty, it wasn't a stunt, and it definitely wasn't an accident. It was a preview. A preview of what happens when a generational talent is allowed to exist fully inside the basketball world, not boxed into one lane, one league, or one narrative. She didn't have to dominate the conversation. She didn't have to force moments. She simply showed up, talked ball, competed, joked, and left the audience wanting more. That's influence. The praise from teammates? Earned. The viral moments? Organic. The rating spike? Telling. And maybe most importantly, the reaction said more than the performance itself. Because whenever Caitlin Clark steps into a new space and thrives, the debate immediately follows. Not about how she did, but about why she's there in the first place. That tells you everything you need to know. On her hoops, we're watching this closely. Not to hype, not to tear down, but to call it straight. Caitlin Clark is becoming one of the most visible figures in basketball. Period. Not women's basketball, basketball. If the WNBA can harness that momentum, the league grows. If it can't, others will. Either way, this debut made one thing clear. The demand hasn't dipped, the spotlight hasn't faded, and Caitlin Clark's presence still moves the needle, whether she's on the court or holding a microphone. Now it's on the game itself to decide what comes next. If you're rocking with the real conversations, make sure you like, subscribe, and tap in with her hoops. We'll keep breaking it down. No fluff, no filters.